Planning is really, really important stuff. It's why we talk about it on the show over and over again. But picture a blended family and the complexity involved when there's more kids and history and sometimes later in life reconfiguration of family, all of that. We're going to focus on some of the things that you need to consider and think about if this is your circumstance. Our guest is Arin Klug. He is co-founder and COO of Epilogue, an online will platform, and a lawyer by background. Hello there, Arin.
Hi, Bruce.
I want the simplest answer as possible here on the law. Everybody should have a will, for sure, for sure. Not everyone has a will. If you don't have one and you don't have a spouse, but you do have stepchildren, what happens?
Well, it's, as individual as estate planning is for everybody, when there's stepkids involved, the only answer is that there is no easy answer. And, it is important to have a will. And like you said off the top, everyone's situation is different. And so, you have situations where there's a second marriage later in life, and you have stepkids that come into the picture, and that relationship looks very different than somebody who has a relationship with stepkids from very early on in life. And so, what happens really depends on whether you have a will or not, and the discussions that take place, and what you decide to put in your will.
The stakes can be high, Can you give us a cautionary tale just to sort of set the scene for the consequences of a lack of planning in this area?
Yeah, absolutely. It used to be the case in Ontario, not anymore, but it's still the case in other provinces that when somebody gets married or remarried, their will gets revoked. So if they had a will, that will is no longer applicable. So you can imagine a situation where somebody has a will and they had kids from a prior relationship, and their will splits everything equally between their kids. That person gets remarried. All of a sudden, that will that left everything equally between the kids isn't valid anymore, right? And so that person, if they died, it's as if they're dying without a will. And the laws in each province dictate what happens to someone's assets when they die without a will. And it's very rare that that's actually what the person would have wanted. So like I said, that's happened. That used to happen a lot in Ontario. The law has changed recently where that revocation doesn't happen anymore, but it's still the case in other provinces across Canada. So something for people to be aware of for sure.
What are some of the most important things for couples? So we're going to make the assumption here that it's a married couple and they've got a blended family, so they get kids maybe on both sides. What are some of the most important things they need to consider as they embark on this plan to sort out their estates long before that document's required?
Well, like I said before, every situation is different, and so it's going to call for a unique situation, a unique solution rather. And so, a really important thing for everybody to consider is what's going to happen when I pass away to my assets. Where are they going to go? And then what's going to happen when that spouse passes away? Where are they going to go? Because keep in mind, Bruce, anybody can change their will at any time. So in a blended family relationship, if one partner passes away and they might have their own kids from a prior relationship, and their will says, we'll give everything to my new spouse, right? That person is not the natural parent of the children. That spouse, that surviving spouse, can change their will whenever they want. So if there's fractured relationships with the stepkids, that person can rewrite their will, perhaps only include their own children in the will, or give it to other people that where the children of the spouse who passed away, they're not benefiting at all.
What would be a starting point for how to have these conversations? And I ask because I'm going to oversimplify it to the nth degree. If you've got a couple, they've got 3 kids, you could start with, okay, the assets are going to be distributed amongst those 3 kids evenly. You could argue for that. When it comes to a blended family, is there anything that you would use as a starting point just to get the conversation going?
The starting point is really just looking at the situation, because again, you might have a couple and the children have been in both of their lives for a really long time. They might have been raising the kids since they were, a year or 2 old, and they really view themselves like a nuclear family would. On the other hand, you have a marriage later in life, and there might not be great relationships between step parents and step kids. So the starting point is an assessment of, what is our situation? And it's really going to speak with an estate planning professional so that they can lay out all of the options that are available to blended families when they're doing their estate planning.
I can imagine that there could be a sense of entitlement for some of the stepkids, in particular, if one half of that couple came into the relationship with significantly more assets than the other. How does that get navigated?
On a case-by-case basis for sure, but it always has to involve a discussion. What I would always tell my clients is that the worst thing that somebody can do with their estate planning is leave a surprise for people, because that sets people up for the disappointment that you're talking about. If you make your wishes clear while you're alive and people understand your reasoning behind it, they might not be happy with what you've decided, but at least they have the opportunity to ask questions and maybe even make their case, so that when that person finally passes away, the arguments aren't as likely to happen.
We have some listeners who are hearing this conversation and thinking, oh, geez, okay, I better do this will with my spouse and sort this out. There are other listeners who may be dating their new person, but not yet in a committed relationship. What's your insight on the drafting of a prenup? How does that help or hinder the estate plan?
When it comes to blended families, prenups are a great thing to have because, again, it sets everybody's expectations from the beginning. Both of the new spouses are going to come in with their own expectations, and it's better to sort those things out in advance. When you're talking about a second relationship, a prenup is a great idea for a first marriage. It's even more important when you're going into a second relationship. And one other thing to point out from the estate planning perspective is, before a couple gets married, they may be living as common law partners. And in a lot of provinces, including Ontario, common law partners are treated differently for estate planning purposes than married couples. If somebody dies without a will, their common law partner isn't entitled to anything under the law.
In the best case circumstance, the will is clear, it gets read, the assets get distributed. Amazing. That doesn't always happen. And there is the impact of the time wasted and the emotional energy expended, but also the cost. Just so people have some sense of this. And I know this is a broad range, it is as wide a range as you can imagine, but what should people have in their head to know financially if they have to contest this thing? I mean, it could be tens of thousands of dollars just to start.
Absolutely, it could be. Like if somebody is planning on contesting a will, then you're looking at tens of thousands of dollars for sure. And even though it is more expensive for a blended family to do their estate planning, because it is much better for them to go to a lawyer rather than to do it online because of all the complexities, that is, you really need to look at that as an investment for the future of your family, because what you're doing by creating a rock solid will with a plan that you've discussed with everybody is you're preventing, or at least reducing the likelihood of a future challenge, of somebody being upset, of somebody saying that they weren't dealt with fairly.
We've had Epilogue on this show before. We've gone through the step by step, super simple. It's a low cost version. Epilogue's one of a handful of online will platforms in this country. And hooray, they're great, super efficient for simple scenarios. Do you believe that your platform, because you can only speak on your own, could account for the complexity of a blended family? Or is this the time it's like, I got to pay the lawyer $600 an hour or whatever that sum may be?
Yeah, Bruce, when we built Epilogue, these types of situations, these types of questions were in our minds. And so when somebody starts the process of creating their will with Epilogue, one of the very first questions we ask them is, do you have children with anyone other than your current spouse or your current partner? And if they say yes, we tell them right away that an online will is probably not the right solution for them, and we help them find a lawyer in their province who can draft the will.
One last thing. Let's say you had someone in your social circle who was in a blended family. In addition to all the comments that you have made, what would be your single most critical piece of advice for them to consider as they draft this estate plan for themselves?
So it's, I've said it before, but it is worth saying again, because the most important thing that somebody could do, aside from actually getting the will done and doing it, is having the discussion about it. A will is not something that should be drafted and then put away and never spoken about. A will is a document that people need to understand why it's there, what you've done, the decisions you've made, because after you're gone, they can't ask you those questions. So have the discussions, even though.
And you're actually including the blended family here. So not just the spouse, but the kids too.
Yeah, and it's for all the reasons we discussed, right? Because what you want to do is avoid those conflicts down the road, and you, as the will maker, you are in the best position to answer those questions. There's no doubt that they can be uncomfortable conversations, but it's what's going to prevent the tens of thousands of dollars of litigation down the road.
Right. That could be a bit of a hot potato. Don't do that at a family dinner on,
No,
Thanksgiving.
no, Christmas and Thanksgiving is not the time, but
Those are out. Those are out. Arin, thank you for your time and your wisdom on this topic today. We appreciate it.
my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Arin Klug, co-founder and COO of Epilogue, the online wills platform. He was here to talk about some of the things you need to keep in mind when it comes to estate planning for blended families.